We are reading a paragraph where Sri Aurobindo introduces the supramental perspective of the universe and the relationship between the absolute, the universe, and the individual. Last time, because it was a special occasion, and there were many who came without the background of our study, we did a kind of a summary of this in the larger picture. But it is worth looking at this paragraph in detail because there are many interesting insights that Sri Aurobindo brings in as he unfolds the overall argument. You will recall we have already looked at two important ideas. First, that the individual, as he relates to the Supreme, he discovers that the Supreme is his own highest and deepest self. On the other hand, in relation to the universe, the Supreme is Brahman. And then Sri Aurobindo brought the relationship between the individual and the universe, and we saw that the universe is a microcosm, the individual is a microcosm of the universe, and the self of the individual and the self of the universe are one and the same in that there are many interesting implications that we saw between the relationship of the individual with the universe. But now we come to the next step in the unfolding discussion, and he puts these three in a very interesting arrangement. He says, this supreme existence is not conditioned by the individual or by the universe. A spiritual knowledge can therefore surpass or even eliminate these two powers of the spirit and arrive at the conception of something utterly transcendent, something that is unnameable and mentally unknowable, a sheer absolute. The traditional way of knowledge eliminates individual and universe. Very briefly stated, but there are many interesting implications and suggestions in the way he describes this. First, we see that both individual and universe are at par in relation to that supreme existence. He does not describe the supreme existence as an absolute, as an unknowable, as an unnameable. It is a supreme existence. Just as the universe is an existence, the individual is an existence, and there are perhaps gradations of existence, there is the supreme existence. If you approach it in a certain way, then you will see it as a sheer absolute, mentally unknowable and unnameable. But we don't have to see it that way only. This is the important idea in the way he describes it. But first we find the universe and the individual are at par in relation to that supreme existence. And as the spiritual knowledge approaches to know that, it can eliminate the individual and the universe from the whole picture. It can. That's a possibility. It has a choice. But it can do that because the supreme existence is not conditioned by the individual or the universe. Now, this is the important part of the relationship. The universe is an outcome of that supreme existence. The individual is an outcome of that supreme existence. But the supreme existence doesn't need either of these. Because it doesn't need either of these, it can be known by eliminating these. And that's one way of knowing it. It's not the only way of knowing it. In a sense, and this is the general approach of the comprehensive character of the Vedic pursuit and Sri Aurobindo's yoga, we do not know that supreme existence unless we know the universe and the individual as its expressions also. But it is possible to know it in abstraction cut off from the universe and the individual. And it is possible because that does not depend on these. You cannot know the universe without knowing that supreme existence. You cannot know the individual without knowing the supreme existence. But you can know that supreme existence without knowing universe and individual. Now, just this very simple statement has so many implications. And I've just touched upon a few. When physics tries to understand the universe, it can only go so far. It cannot know the universe entirely, even a material universe and its functioning, unless it posits a supreme existence beyond. Unless it begins to recognize that there is something beyond out of which this universe has come. The problem is the physics may restrain itself to begin with by saying we will not consider things which are outside the domain of physical senses. It may start like that, but it will find itself compelled to meet those things outside the domain of the senses. And it will find that it is there that the answer to the why and where from of the universe is found. And it is this relationship which is extremely interesting. To know the universe truly, you have to go all the way back to the thing from which it appeared, that supreme existence. So in physics, it comes to this recognition. There was a Big Bang, a moment of creation, so to say. This itself is largely influenced by the religious backdrop because God made the universe in 7 days in the biblical tradition, and therefore the scientists had to fit in somehow in that mindset. So there had to be a Big Bang when it suddenly started. But space and time are created in the Big Bang. So was there ever a time before? Obviously there was not. It is a logical fallacy. But still, having had a Big Bang, if you say, in the Big Bang all the universe and its energy was released. Where did that energy come from? How did it get released in this way? What held the energy before it was released? And none of these questions can be answered to physics because it says that is outside the domain of my senses. But in the very act of asking this question, the physicist is forced to recognize there is something outside the domain of the senses, which is the original cause of the universe. And it is ultimately, whichever way you approach it, whether you say a Big Bang universe or a static universe, whatever, you recognize that there is an existence which is greater than your senses, greater than the power of the intellect, greater than your logic, because at that point all your logical equations break down at the point of the Big Bang. So it is by definition an existence which is supreme. So whether you accept to use these words or not, you are forced to recognize that there is a supreme existence out of which, against which, in relation to which the universe exists. And it's the same for the individual. When we begin a subjective inward quest, we find layers and layers and parts and complex relationships within us. But there comes a point where we touch something which is more essential, more fundamental, that is of such a nature that our starting point of inner senses, they fail. Our mental understanding fails and we sense a reality beyond, which to that perceiving sense or rationality is overwhelming. But that exists, that does not need me. I emerge from it. I exist in relation to it. I've shared with you a very moving experience of a well-known Buddhist teacher who spoke to me of it once in a moment of intimate sharing. And he said when he was still very young, before he had really taken into the spiritual quest, he had a dream experience. And in that dream, he was climbing a ladder and a sheer wall. And it was the wall which was at the edge of the universe. And he was climbing the ladder and then he reached the top of the wall. And then he looked beyond. and suddenly he saw this immense darkness, and he was so afraid. The intense fear in front of that woke him up. And to this day, he says, when he remembers that, he can feel the intensity of that fear. And even as he was narrating it, one could feel that vibration of what the intensity of that which he experienced. It was, as I said, a dream experience where on the edge of his individuality and formation, he saw that thing beyond. But to the little ego sense, it was overwhelming, and it only knew a relationship of fear because it was so overwhelmed. So even in the individual pursuit of our own sense of identity, existence, why do I exist in relation to what? From where does this sense of awareness emerge? You go back to something which transcends and is like a supreme existence. This hard problem of artificial intelligence in computers, they call it the hard problem. What gives you the sense that I exist? A computer can be made to behave like a human being. It can churn out words following certain patterns of grammar, and if you were emailing the computer, you would think it's a human being. And yet, do you know that you are self-aware and the computer is not? How do we know? Well, there are many ways one could test it, but still, that's the hard problem. Where does this sense of self-awareness come, and can we really create it in a computer? There's a very interesting movie which has recently come out, which is titled Lucy, which explores this problem. They create a computer now which has access to all the knowledge on the internet, and then suddenly it's supposed to become super intelligent. The fallacy, of course, is information doesn't make it intelligent, but still. So when the scientist meets this computer in a conversation, it says, Lucy, can you prove that you're self-aware? And the computer, Lucy, answers, well, I'm sorry, the name of the movie is not Lucy, the name is Transcendence. That's a different movie. Lucy is a different one. Transcendence is the movie. So the computer is asked, can you prove that you're self-aware? And the computer replies, well, that's a difficult question. Can you prove that you're self-aware? And this is a question we can ask of a human being. And the human being knows he is self-aware, even if he cannot prove it. The nature of the proof that I am self-aware is necessarily outside the domain of the senses and outside the domain of my rationality, and points already to a transcendent existence, a supreme existence. The computer throws back the question, but the point would still be asked, is there a way by which the computer could become self-aware, and then would we be able to recognize it? What would be that thing? And we don't have an answer to that so far. But the point is, this very question of awareness subjectively points to this supreme existence, not conditioned by individual and universe, but universe and individual are conditioned by it and dependent on it. Therefore, a spiritual knowledge can surpass the individual and the universe, and even eliminate them and still know that without these two. When it does that, then it finds that to be utterly transcendent, something unnamable, mentally unknowable, a sheer absolute. And then it can know it only by negation, not this, not this, not this. But this is the argument placed here. There are many other nuances which are offered. When he says, a spiritual knowledge can therefore surpass or even eliminate these two powers of the spirit. So the relationship of the universe and individual with that is, these are powers of the spirit. The universe is a power of the spirit expressing itself. The individual is a power of the spirit expressing itself. We are that. The universe is that. And therefore, you cannot know that truly. You cannot say you know that truly unless you know its power, unless you know its powers also as itself. And that's where the fallacy of this approach comes. The fallacy of the approach that says, I will eliminate individual, I will eliminate universe, I will know that alone. And then claim that I know that entirely. That is the fallacy, that is the error. Because these are powers of that. You have to know these in relation to that to know that truly. But still, this being the case, that there is a possibility to know it exclusively, a spiritual knowledge can surpass or even eliminate. Now, these describe two different kinds of experiences which exist with philosophies and religions corresponding to them. In one, we surpass the individual and the universe and see that we accept that the universe and the individual exist, but they have at best a secondary role. They are only a means for us to be able to have the experience of knowing that. They remain unchangeable domains of ignorance that you have to get out of in order to know that. This is one approach. The other approach eliminates the universe and individual altogether, saying they don't exist, they're illusory, they're a figment of your imagination, a dream, an illusion, a maya. The difference between these two approaches is, from this perspective, not too much. In both cases, the universe and the individual are as if cut off from that transcendent existence. So in the first example, where the universe and the individual are left as domains of ignorance, you will find this common in certain traditions, including certain Buddhist schools of thought. The other one, which rejects universe and individual as illusory, is common in some of the later Vedantic traditions, particularly the Shankarite tradition. But in this approach then, you have a sheer absolute, mentally unknowable. And therefore, the traditional way of knowledge eliminates individual and universe. The absolute it seeks after is featureless, indefinable, relationless, not this, not that, neti, neti. Now, the definition of the absolute is itself, therefore, because the universe is removed and individual removed, the definition of the absolute becomes featureless, indefinable, relationless. But it is possible to know the absolute with features, with forms, definitions, relationships. This is the point he is hinting at. And you would still know the absolute. But we have defined absolute by eliminating universe and individual. Therefore, we know it only as featureless. And yet, so he says, and yet, although it is not this, not that, and yet we can say of it that it is one, that it is infinite, that it is ineffable bliss, consciousness, existence. This idea you will find in the Vedantic tradition in particular, where you end up describing that using certain vocabulary, and yet you have to say it is beyond the intellect. The words Aurobindo uses, he capitalizes one, infinite, ineffable, bliss, consciousness, existence, to show that these are of a domain of an order completely different. We could dwell on each of these, and we have already covered these ideas before many times, so I will not repeat. What does it mean to know that as one with a capital O? Ekam Sat, we say. It is one. In the vocabulary, in Sanskrit, we have this word ekam, which is one. To say many, the word is unek. Ek and unek. Unek as in not one, many. And this goes back to a profound philosophy. When you consider the idea of many, how can you speak of many without having a one? A many consists of ones, many ones, isn't it? So what is the underlying truth of things? There is only one. Many is made up of many ones. So many can only be known and defined in relation to a one. On the other hand, the moment you say one, this thing is one, by definition there should exist also a not one, an ek, which is many. So Sri Aurobindo explains this in the commentary on the Upanishads. The moment you speak of a numerical one, you are carrying with you the idea of a numerical many, which may be a multiplicity of one or it may be a not one. Either way, you come to the idea of many. So innate to the idea of one is a many, as long as you are speaking of numerical one. The one here with a capital O is different. It is one in identity. All the things which exist are the same one. And so in this concept, you have a oneness, you have a multiplicity, and they are not contradictions. It is not un-ek. The multiplicity is not made up of oneness, it is an expression of the greater capital O oneness. The individual separate unit one is also an expression of that capital O oneness. So this is the higher concept of a one. That's why we have to use a capital O. It is a one which is one in identity. It includes infinite manyness as well as individual oneness as expressions of itself simultaneously, and they're both facets of each other. There's no contradiction between them. But this underlying capital O oneness is the nature of that supreme existence. Similarly, when we speak of infinite, the same problem comes when you speak of a finite. Let's conceive of a finite line, a piece, a stick. The moment you've defined the stick is defined by its limits, by its borders. There is something outside that. Is that limited? If you put a box there, well, there is something outside that. Unendingly, there is something outside that. So the stick which is finite cannot be defined unless there is an infinity in the background supporting it. On the other hand, if you have an infinity, you can zoom in, you will still see the same infinity. You can zoom out, you will still see the same infinity. It is as if featureless, unknowable, because you cannot find any feature. Conceive of a line which is infinite and there are no marks on it. You can go as far as you want from it, you will still see the same line. You can come as close as you want to it, you will still see the same line because there are no features. So is it the same thing? Yes, it is the same thing. You can zoom in, out, you can make it large and small, it's still the same infinite. Now if you put a feature, a mark, and then you zoom out, you zoom in, you'll see that mark shrinking, widening on the line which is still infinite. So the moment you have a concept of an infinite, the infinity by itself is as if non-existent. Unless you put a mark in it which defines it, then only you can know the infinity. So the idea is this: if you have a finite piece, implied is an infinite. If you know an infinite, implied is a finite mark, measure, which is a part of the infinite. So the two are as if complementary to each other. To be able to know one, you must know the other, and you cannot ever experience one without experiencing the other at the same time. So this is the domain of the numerical finites and infinites. But the I cap infinite, which is the nature of that supreme existence, is of a different character. It includes the finites, it includes these infinities, but the infinities are not made up of pieces. It is a consciousness which is essentially indivisible, which is complete. It can limit itself, but it cannot be divided. The infinite line which we drew, you can make a mark and cut it up, so to say. That cannot be cut up. It is whole, it is indivisible, and yet it can narrow itself to focus in a narrow front. And so you can have a finite piece, which is an expression of that. It can also reveal itself as an infinite line or an infinite shape, surface, universe, anything. And still that is a front of it, and that exceeds that. So that's why we have to use a capital I to say infinite and not an ordinary infinity of our numerical measure experiences. So in the same way, ineffable bliss, consciousness, existence, all are capital to describe their character. A bliss, a consciousness, an existence which is indivisible, infinite in its content, all inclusive in its potential, always complete, existing in an autarky. It is its own completeness. It doesn't need anything else to be complete or to relate to. Such is the nature of the bliss, consciousness, existence, and therefore ineffable, indescribable. Although unknowable to the mind, yet through our individual being and through the names and forms of the universe, we can approach the realization of the Supreme Self, that is Brahman. And by the realization of the Self, we come to a certain realization also of this utter absolute, of which our true self is the essential form in our consciousness. These are the devices the human mind is compelled to use if it is to form to itself any conception at all of a transcendent and unconditioned absolute. So this is the practical situation now. We say that we are that in essence, etc. Although we want to know that in abstraction, in an absolute, how will we know that? We have to begin with what we are. We can't start by saying, I will eliminate everything without even knowing what you're eliminating. So you have to become aware of yourself. You have to become aware of the universe and then peel off layers to get to something which is that. So that's why he says these are devices that the mind needs. And what are the devices? Although unknowable to the mind, yet through our individual being and through the names and forms of the universe, we can approach the realization of the Supreme Self, that is Brahman. So there are two starting points. From the individual subjectively going within, from the universe objectively going out. The subjective way is the way of yoga. The objective way, we may say, is the way of science. And we may even take it in the spirit of yoga as a quest to know the ultimate reality. So in the subjective way, we start through our individual being, and in the objective way, we start through the names and forms of the universe. Through the subjective way, we approach the Supreme Self. Through the names and forms of the universe, we approach Brahman, the Self that is Brahman, because they are one in their origin. So what does this mean? Through the individual being, we can approach the realization of the Supreme Self. And this is the approach of the traditional way of knowledge. I am not body, I am not emotion, I am not thought. What's left? Just this observing awareness that's observing the thought, emotion and body. But then I can go still further and say, where does this observing awareness come from? And it stands back from itself and observes its own observing power. And then it notices that its observing power itself has a further depth and can dissociate itself successively. Or this observing power itself is a narrow front of a larger, more fluid, formless awareness, which is narrowing to form this individual front. And so it opens out to a deeper, greater kind of awareness, reality, and thus approaches eventually the Supreme Self. On the other side, through the names and forms of the universe, we start with what are all these objects, what are all these forms, what are all these qualities, where do they come from, they are molecules, they are atoms, they are subatomic particles. We reveal layers and layers until we get to something which is most essential. And as we approach that essentiality, we find suddenly the laws and the relationships of things tend to approach the character of the one and the infinite. The identities blur. You can no more separate particles. They are as if waves of an underlying one reality. You can no more separate space or time. We find everything is deeply interconnected as you approach that deeper layer of reality. In the ultimate fusion, the scientist recognizes that his objective reality is deeply subjective. How I think, how I feel, how I approach the measurement of my experiment changes the outcome of the experiment. I am a part of the experiment. From the other side, the yogi, as he enters his deeper self, he breaks out of this narrow mental front of consciousness and discovers this vast underlying self of consciousness in which the whole universe is held as himself, as part of himself, inseparably. Both cases, whether you took the other approach through the universe or through the individual, we come to this meeting point where the self is Brahman, individual, supreme, and universe in its supreme origin are one and the same self, that is Brahman. So all this is captured in a very simple form of statement. Although unknowable to the mind, yet through our individual being and through the names and forms of the universe, we can approach the realization of the supreme self, that is Brahman. And by the realization of the self, we come to a certain realization also of this utter absolute, of which our true self is the essential form of our consciousness. Now remember, we are still taking the traditional path of not this, elimination. So he says, by the realization of the self, we come to a certain realization of the utter absolute, not the total realization of the utter absolute. So when you seek the realization of self by eliminating all that is as if not self, you do reach an utter absolute eventually. But it is one way of knowing it. It is not the only way, and it is not the whole of the absolute. But that absolute, as we come to know it, of that absolute, our true self is the essential form in our consciousness. We still have this experience of our consciousness, and the essence of our consciousness and the essential form is that absolute. He gives you a Sanskrit word, Swarupa. Rupa is form, image, Swa, self, of itself. So image of itself, form of itself. So essential form in our consciousness. That's the experience we have. So if we pursue this path, we would find that in a state of deep concentration, when all has been eliminated, all the senses, mind and everything, a pure essential awareness remains. And in that essential awareness, we experience the absolute. And when you are in consciousness of absolute, again, depending on how you approach it, individual, universe, everything is as if irrelevant, non-existent, because you've eliminated it in your pursuit of the absolute. And yet there is an awareness. You cannot use the word thing, and there's a whole problem of vocabulary at that point. Emerging from that consciousness, though, you find as you return to your normal awareness, you do not have words to describe what was experienced. On the other hand, in the very immediate return, you have the full impact, glow of the intensity of that experience. And there is an overwhelming character to it. And yet the overwhelming character is indescribable. You can say, you can only know it, you cannot describe it truly. But if you had to describe it, you would use terms like ineffable, bliss, consciousness, existence, infinite, one, etc. But all the words we use do not really describe that. But now who is saying this? The person in this consciousness, which is not ineffable, one, infinite, etc. And yet this fellow seems to be able to know that, or has a memory of that, or at least a reflection of a memory, there is obviously some kind of connection. So on the return to the normal mental consciousness, we still realize I have this consciousness in which I am living in this world, but that is now in relation to this, my essential self, that deepest essential part that I could go to. But is it all of this also? Not really, because it transcends this. And yet this is able to retain a memory of it. So there is obviously some kind of connection, some continuity. So this is the practical problem. The mind ends up with some part of us in its essence which is identified with that. The rest then is there provisionally. What do you do with it? Well, in this approach, since you defined that by elimination of individual and universe, in this approach you'll say, well, wait out your life, let your life finish off, let all the sanskaras expend themselves and exhaust themselves until nothing is left and I can slide back into my absolute and merge into it permanently. What was the point of this universe? What was the point of this individual taking birth? There's no point to it. It's just illusory. It's just a condition of ignorance. It's just an entrapment. You have to get out of it. Now you can see how these conclusions come naturally, inevitably, because you defined that by elimination of individual and universe. The approach that Aurobindo will present is completely different. And he will introduce the supramental in relation to that. But for now, he says simply, these devices of following name and form, following the source of our own individual being, these are the devices the human mind is compelled to use if it is to form to itself any conception at all of a transcendent and unconditioned absolute. You have to go through some mechanism, some method, eliminating or whatever. The system of negation is indispensable to it in order to get rid of its own definitions and limited experience. So the mind, because it is the mind which is pursuing, and the mind by definition knows only by lines and pieces and limitations, well, it has to break all those limitations. How do you get to that? Except by removing the devices by which I am able to know. And these are precisely the devices by which my mind knows. When I remove them, obviously my mind says I cannot know anymore. So that is indescribable. It is obliged to escape through a vague indefinite into the infinite. So what does the mind do? It removes the borders, it removes the barriers, it removes the limits. The moment you remove borders and barriers, what's left? Indefinite. Something is there, but I cannot give you an exact outline. I cannot give you an exact description, an exact shape. The borderlines blur, and through the indefinite, it escapes into the infinite. That's the only way the mind knows. And the problem really boils down to this. Mind as a tool of knowledge can only know by cutting up into pieces, narrowing and limiting. If we had a tool which was superior, which did not have the need to cut up and limit, it could know that directly without going through all this negation or elimination, and without ending up with the conclusion that life and individual is purposeless, meaningless, illusory, or circumstance of ignorance. So you see here the depth of the insight that Aurobindo offers. All of this inevitably is the outcome of having sought to know that through the mind by eliminating individual and universe. What's the correction now? We will seek to know that not by mind but by a greater power which can know it directly. Not by eliminating individual and universe, but by including them in the transcendence. So this is the solution it offers. But meanwhile, what happens with the mind? It has to escape through the vague indefinite, for it lives in a closed prison of constructions and representations that are necessary for its action, but are not the self-existent truth either of matter or life or mind or spirit. So the mind, because of the way it functions, it has to build a picture, it has to build a representation. Observe what happens the moment somebody narrates to you an incident. What's happening inside your mind? You're building a picture. I went forward, I walked so many steps, and in front of me there was a door which was closed. Oh, I forgot to tell you that I was walking on a tightrope. Suddenly your picture has to change. I forgot to tell you that I was on a ship. Suddenly your picture has to change and you have to go back and rebuild the picture. And the whole problem with the mind is it is always constructing a picture, and the construction is never an exact, it's not the original. It's a picture, it's a map that you have drawn. There's a famous, there's a popular saying now where they say, the map is not the territory. I can hold a map of India in my hand. I can hold a globe in my hand and say, the earth is mine to possess. No, it's not. I have a picture of the earth. So in my mind, when I hear a story, I have a picture of your story. I don't know your story truly. It is as illusory as claiming that I own the earth when I hold it in my hand. But the same thing happens with ideas, not just stories and narrations. When I try to convey an idea by translating the idea through words and through images in my mind, I've already lost it. And I end up having a 2-hour argument, at the end of which I suddenly realize, oh, that's what you meant. Now I understand. And of course, then there's no difference between us. So the whole problem starts with the mind needing to create representations and hold representations to know. It doesn't know the thing itself. But if, so he says, these are what mind holds are not self-existent truth, either of matter or life or mind or spirit. Now here's an interesting suggestion again, and that's why this is so important to dwell on. Why is Sri Aurobindo saying this? There is something which is self-existent truth of matter, of life, of mind and of spirit. But what mind is doing in construction is not the self-existent truth. So there is in the mind a consciousness or a part or a faculty which is a self-existent truth of mind. Just as there is even of the body something deep inside underlying which is like a self-existent truth, which does not need such constructions. And if you could somehow get to that self-existent truth, you would know it in itself without this construction and without then needing the elimination, negation, etc. So how do we get to that? But if we can once cross beyond the mind's frontier twilight into the vast plane of supramental knowledge, these devices cease to be indispensable. It was indispensable as long as we were in mind. We break out of mind, there is a vast plane of knowledge, which is supramental. And the word simply means you transcend mind, supra. Mind here is defined in terms of a domain of knowledge where there is partly light, partly darkness, and things are known in a half light and mixture, never completely known. There is a level above which is pure light, free of ignorance, where all is known and the knowledge is your identity. And it is a vast plane. There these devices cease to be indispensable. Supermind has quite another, a positive and direct and living experience of the Supreme Infinite. Because it is itself that infinite, in its knowledge of it is a knowledge of itself in identity. The analogy we will draw on now, and we will use repeatedly many analogies to appreciate better how that works. An ant can crawl on your body and it can draw a roadmap. Let's say the ant is carrying a little piece of paper and drawing a picture as it wanders over your body, and it draws the lines around your finger. It says, aha, there are 5 fingers, projections. I have measured them so many centimeters. And now it goes back to its little nest with this roadmap. The human being is made up of 5 fingers. You can go through the whole game. The ant now wandering on the face comes back with a different picture. Human being is made up of 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth. And it's dangerous to go near the nose. You can get blown away. There's a tremendous power there. So, they all narrate their different stories. Even if, let's say for argument's sake, all the ants manage to put together their pictures and form the full body image, it's still an image. They don't know what a human being is like. They only know a form of the body shape. On the other hand, if we shift out of the ant consciousness into the human awareness, what is your body like? I am my body. I have 2 arms, hands, fingers, face, but I am all these things already. Are you aware of your hand and your fingers separately? Yes. Are you aware of your hands and fingers all together? Yes. Are you aware of the totality of your body altogether? Yes. Can you be aware of them separately? Yes. So you are at the same time the fingers, at the same time you are the hand, which is also made of collection of fingers, but you are at the same time the whole body which transcends them all. So there is a oneness, there is a multiplicity, and you say, but where's the opposition between the two? They are just different ways of focusing my attention on myself. I am always the same, whether I focus on the multiplicity of my fingers, or the partial oneness of my hand, or the total oneness of my whole body. I'm still the same. It's just a focus of my attention which is playing around. The supermind knows that absolute reality in this way. It knows it in itself because it is one with it. And then it can say, oh, I have universe as my body form. I have individual as my body form. I am one, but I also am many at the same time. And they are not contradictions. They are just different ways by which I know myself. It's very simple. It's very obvious when you think of it this way. So now he describes how the supermind knows itself and the universe. The absolute is beyond personality and beyond impersonality. And yet it is both the impersonal and the supreme person and all persons. So you see how it works now. Using this analogy, let's say each of the fingers is like a person. When I am aware of my whole body, I am impersonal. I am not focusing on the individual fingers. They exist in a totality that is me. Me as body. I am equally in relation to all the cells of my body. There's no personality there anywhere, no special relation. On the other hand, I can say I have a right hand which is different from a left hand. I have fingers which are different from palm, and I have a finger which is fat, a finger which is thin, a finger which is tall, a finger that is short. And in their functions and in their internal relationships, they are different. And I can put a special quality of emphasis to my first finger as to my thumb, which is a different quality. And then you say you have personality. This personality is different from this personality, which is different from personality of hand versus personality of leg versus personality of face. But will you say the impersonality is contradicting the personality? No. They're just different ways of being aware of myself. They're at the same time existent, but you don't experience contradiction. But the ant, which is wandering over the finger, will say these are personalities. But the scientist ant says, they're all made up of the same cells. Actually, the body is an agglomeration of so many cells, and the body is impersonal. All the cells are equally important. Any one of the cells could be removed and the body would cease to function. So it is impersonality of the body which is a greater truth. And then the philosopher says, no, personality is a greater truth. And so we go on in this quarrel because we look at pieces in separated consciousness. So for mind, personality and impersonality are contradictions. For supermind, they are just different ways of looking at the same reality, which transcends both personality and impersonality, but which includes both of them equally. This is the best part. The transcendence is not an elimination now. The transcendence is an inclusion. So now when we know the transcendent absolute through supermind, Universe is one aspect of it, individual is another aspect of it, freedom from both is another aspect of it. It is all of these at the same time. They're just different ways of knowing it, and they're not contradictions anymore. So this is the description Sri Aurobindo offers now, how Supermind knows. Both impersonal and supreme person and all persons. So even in the fragmentation of all individuals, they're all special focal points, and then there is a supreme person which is one special relationship to the whole universe, and at the same time it stands back and is equally aware of all things impersonally and all at the same time. It's not such a big deal. For the supramental consciousness, they're all just different ways of knowing itself. Next. The absolute is beyond the distinction of unity and multiplicity, and yet it is the one and the innumerable many in all the universes. So the distinction of unity and multiplicity, we have already discussed how the two, unity and multiplicity, appear to be as if contradictions or opposites of each other. But that absolute includes both of these. It is one in identity. It is also many in its emphasis of difference of qualities in all universes. So even if you speak of one universe, you may speak of another universe in opposition to this. So conceive of all possible universes, it is still there in all of them, one and many. Still it remains transcending unity and multiplicity. If you bring your attention back to the mind looking at the world through the senses, this looks like a contradiction. How can you be one and many at the same time? Strange. But if you shift your mind back to this concept that we have created now of the body consciousness and the way it knows multiplicity and oneness of itself, no, it's very simple. It's obvious. It is one consciousness, emphasizing distinctions or emphasizing its overall unity, but it's the same consciousness, same being. No contradiction. Then he says, it is beyond all limitation by quality, and yet it is not limited by quality-less void, but is to all infinite qualities. So, the moment we say there is a quality, the Shankarite and the Buddhist will say, oh, but that is beyond quality. Yes, it is true. It is not limited by quality. But that doesn't mean quality is separate from it. Quality is included in it. That's why he says it is beyond all limitation by quality. He doesn't say it is beyond quality. It is beyond all limitation by quality. But then if you were to tell the Shankarite and the Buddhist, you mean that thing has no quality because you're describing it by elimination? No, that's not true. You know, the first stage of the argument will always be, yes, it transcends all qualities. But then what's it like when you reach it? Yes, that is indescribable. So you end up with a description of a quality which is beyond description. So it's a bit of a confusing situation. I had this discussion once. We had a gathering where self versus non-self, that was the theme of the discussion. So we had Vedantists and Buddhists, and we ended up saying we are all speaking of the same thing but with a different vocabulary. But still, at some point they spoke of nirvana, and I said, and what is this dharmakaya? That is the divine body which they describe, or the divine substance. That is the nature of the nirvana. That is the nature of the absolute. So the moment you posit an absolute, you posit also nature of absolute. But that's not this nature. That is a different nature of a different category altogether. So the point is, the moment you have a consciousness, you will always have the relationship of consciousness with itself. And that is the nature of your consciousness. So even in the absolute, if it is whatever word you give to it, it knows itself. And so in itself knowing, that is its nature. So you have a quality which transcends all limitation of quality. That's how you could state it, perhaps. So Sri Aurobindo puts it differently. He says, beyond all limitation by quality, And yet it is not limited by a qualityless void. You can't say that is beyond quality and therefore it has no quality, it is an emptiness. It is an emptiness which is also all infinite qualities at the same time. But it is the breaking away of limitation which is its character. All qualities are included, all negation of quality is included, there is no limitation of any. It is this completeness, this wholeness, all inclusiveness, which is the nature of the transcendence, of the absolute. Then it is the individual soul and all souls, and more of them. So we have again this contradiction when we go individually to realize that, and somebody else goes to realize his self, yourself, myself, are they different, etc. We can have all these philosophical discussions, but when we enter the experience, we experience the oneness. We are individually all those selves and all souls, and more of them, even souls which are not yet born, not yet thrown out into manifestation, even the infinite potential of innumerable souls yet to be thrown out, all of that is included. Sorry. And more of them in my edition. Okay. So we have a difference in text. It is the individual soul and all souls and none of them. It would be probably more correct in the new edition, I think. I have the old edition. None and more could be a misreading, but logically it would be more appropriate to say none of them. It is all souls and none of the souls at the same time. So there is a state of consciousness where you stand back and there is no separate soul anymore. There is only one all-encompassing consciousness. And then that an all-encompassing consciousness can lean to become innumerable souls. And there are no more oppositions anymore. They're just different ways of knowing itself. When I'm aware of my whole body as a whole, I have no parts. I'm just one being. But then I can, as if, concentrate on the distinctions of my whole being, and I say, I have hands which are different from legs, which are different from face, and they have relationships, and each of these is separate and different. So you will find Sri Aurobindo plays this with great effect in The Life Divine, where he describes the nature of the whole universe. And he says, if you observe carefully, everywhere there is this universal law, universal substance, universal energy, universal mind consciousness, the same everywhere across the universe, across time, across space. And it looks as if there is only this very impersonal, vast universe. But on the other hand, he says, everywhere you'll find this impersonal one law, one consciousness, one matter, one energy. Everywhere it throws out uniquely distinct forms and appearances. No two waves are exactly the same. No two flowers are exactly the same. No two beings are exactly the same. No two planets are exactly the same. Everything is distinctly unique. And suddenly you realize the nature of the universe is to manifest this uniqueness. Nothing is ever repeated. And just a moment ago you said there is this vast, flat, impersonal universality, and now suddenly you find the universality is teeming with this individuality. And then he says these two are only are fully understood only when we recognize that the purpose of the universality is to manifest individuality. It is not fulfilled unless it fulfills itself through innumerable diversity of individuality. And then the two are just facets of each other. There are no more oppositions. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot experience individuality interacting unless there is the backdrop of universality of something common amongst us. If your body's substance and my body's substance was completely different with nothing in common, we could not touch. Because there is an underlying universality of the same body substance and matter substance, we can touch. I can pick up the flower and smell it because the substance of flower is same as substance of my body. We can communicate ideas because substance of mind in you is same as substance of mind in me universally. Therefore, we can have individual relationships. So you see how the play of individuality needed an underlying universality. If we were not the same substance, we could not interact. On the other hand, universality without individuality would be incomplete, meaningless, pointless. In fact, universality could not know its universality unless it put forward something to distinguish, to step out of its universality, and as an individual turn back and observe its universality. So the way this idea is articulated is, the universe, if it really wanted to enjoy itself, it had to know itself. It had to know and experience its universality. But to experience its universality, it had to project a separate individuality that then could awaken to look back and admire the beautiful universe. So the universality cannot know itself or fulfill itself unless it puts forward individuality. An innumerable individuality to know its innumerable potential and variety. So you see how the two are deeply bound to each other. It is the individual soul and all souls and none of them. It is the formless Brahman and the universe. So when we speak of Brahman, we are always speaking of something which goes outside the domain of form. Universe is Brahman entering the domain of form. Remove form, you have Brahman. Bring back form, you have universe. Universe is Brahman, bound to form. But it is both of these at the same time. Again, if we dwell on it, dwell on the idea of universe as a bundle of form. Observe what is the underlying thing which becomes form. And physics goes all the way back to say atoms, subatomic particles, energy. Energy whirling becomes form. But the reality underlying is formless energy. When that energy whirls to take on specific forms and sustains the forms, we have form. But it is made up of an underlying non-form energy. The fact is, although you see form of universe, the reality behind is a formless energy whirling continuously, and no form is, even in its whirl, nothing is really stable. The sustaining form of an unstable energy is your stability of appearance. So again, you see how the Brahman underlying and the form of universe, they're just facets of each other. It is the cosmic and supra-cosmic spirit, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Self, the Supreme Purusha, and Supreme Shakti, the ever unborn who is endlessly born. And so the description continues. Each of these you will find, he gives one long list. Each of them represents a high status, which is original, that is, which is in the origin of things, which is a creative power, which is a transcending poise. But a long list which he gives. And each of them is a facet of that. It is the cosmic spirit. So what is the divine? It is a spirit which is become the whole cosmos. But it is also the supra-cosmic spirit because it stands above the cosmos that it has become. Because before it could become cosmos, it was transcending cosmos. Even as it becomes cosmos, it has to support the becoming by standing above in transcendence. So it is still cosmic spirit and supra-cosmic spirit. As the origin of things, as the creator and manifester of things, it rules. So it is the Supreme Lord. And here it is the Lordship, the ruling authority, which is emphasized. The Supreme Self, transcending all variations, standing back in support of things unchanging, that is the Supreme Self. But as the Supreme Self, it is impersonal. It is also the Supreme Purusha, And as Supreme Purusha, now this self takes a relationship, presiding, supporting, even accepting the play of the universe. So you see how this is different, boys. In the state of the Purusha, the divine enjoys standing back, not involved, watches, and the play of energy plays out. But the Purusha not just watches, Sri Aurobindo says, what it chooses to accept is what the energy plays out. So there's a more subtle relationship that what the Purusha does not want to enjoy, the Shakti does not play out. So in a sense, the Purusha chooses what the Shakti will play out. So he is also the sanctioner, the Anumanta. He sanctions, says yes, or he says no, I'm bored of this game. Immediately the Shakti moves to play a different game. Now you observe, this is the same game which happens in our mind. There's a play of thoughts going on. After a while you say, I'm bored with this. And immediately the thought moves to something else, looking for something interesting. And then your thought settles on something and you say, this is interesting. And then the thought goes on playing. You are not consciously controlling the thought. Your thought is wandering. The moment it is bored, the moment you are bored, the thought moves to look for something else that is interesting. You did not say, I will choose to think of something interesting. It just happened. Your thoughts wandered automatically when you got bored. So you, the person, at that point, are this Purusha. But as a Purusha, you are kind of hypnotized by the play of the thought game of Prakriti. But when you're bored, the Prakriti immediately shifts to look for something interesting. And she reflects what is interesting for you at that moment. If once you recognize that this is the true relationship, you can say, then I can choose. And now I choose to stop these thoughts. I choose to build a positive thought. And immediately Prakriti follows. And suddenly you discover you're not merely an observing Purusha, hypnotized and compelled by what your thought compels you. You are actually the king, the lord, the ruler of your own energy of thought. So what he is describing here is building to this. So first he says it is the cosmic and supracosmic spirit, which is detached. There's nothing in this idea of a personal involvement or interest. It is just standing back. Then it is the Supreme Lord as the ruler. The Supreme Self, detached. And then the Supreme Purusha, but the moment you have Purusha, you have Supreme Shakti. So the Supreme Purusha and Supreme Shakti and the play of these two, but it is both of these at the same time. The ever unborn who is endlessly born. So again, you could pick one of these and build a whole philosophy around it. The divine is Purusha only. The divine is Shakti only. The divine is Lord only. The divine is ever unborn. Yes. But the divine is always born, unendingly. But he is both of these. And to the mind approaching through the senses, these appear opposite. But when you enter in identity, where you are the unborn that pours out unendingly his infinite potential, they are just two different facets of yourself. Even this word, two different facets, we have to use because that's the nature of the mind's way of knowing, by putting in opposition and relation. In the supermind, it is both at the same time in identity. You do not even use the word facet. It is Shakti, it is Purusha. It is ever unborn, it is always born. But because it is, there is no contradiction, or the idea of facet is a transitional idea. When you pass from the intellect to supermind, you see them as facets of both. And this poise where you see facets of both is what Sri Aurobindo calls the overmind. In the overmind, you see all these things as facets of one. But in the supermind, even the idea of facets vanishes. You are simultaneously all these. You are one thing which is all these simultaneously, rather. You are not at the same time this and at the same time that. You are one. That oneness has these. That's all one can say. So the ever unborn who is endlessly born. The suggestion here also is our idea of the universe as a Big Bang universe is deeply flawed. And a time will come, I believe, when physics will awaken to this reality that the universe always was, always will be. We can speak of cycles within the universe because time exists within the universe. The universe itself is a reality that emerges out of the timeless. So you can never speak of a point where the universe is born, because the point when it is born, time didn't exist. It is as if a timeless moving into experience. Within experience exists time and space. So the moment a timeless moves into experience, the space will be infinite and the time will be eternal also. And within that eternal time, the universe may go through cycles. Then it makes sense. But there is, and this is a reality which modern physics will discover, which the Vedic physics already states very clearly, matter is constantly being created, thrown out from that underlying reality. Everywhere, at every moment, new matter, new particles, new atoms are being thrown up and being created, while certain old ones are allowed to lapse back into the underlying energy. Nothing is ever lost, because it is the same energy which throws up these bubbles of foam, and the foam bubbles burst as new bubbles of foam are created. So it seems as if the overall quantum of matter is pretty much static. But the reality is there is always new creation and new absorption into the source. So the unborn, ever unborn, who is endlessly born. The infinite, who is innumerably finite. So we already saw this example, how you cannot have an infinity knowing itself unless you have this multiplicity of finites. But if an infinite chooses to express itself in domain of finites fully, then you would have an infinity of finites, an infinity of pieces. And the infinity of pieces is unending. You can never measure them. You'll never stop measuring them. That's the nature of this universe. The line, which is infinite, you put marks, the marks are infinitely, unendingly present. And the universe, therefore, is of that character. The infinite, who is innumerably finite. You can never end up counting finites. So when they say again in the physics that the universe has 10 to the power so many atoms, not true really. At best you can say in the observable area of the universe that we can see, this is the estimated number of atoms. But there's a whole infinite universe beyond which we do not see, cannot see. And so the number of atoms is infinite. The multitudinous one. So oneness, multiplicity. We have discussed this already, so I'm not dwelling on it. Multiplicity is an aspect of the oneness. The complex, simple. So you know the divine, in its essence it is so simple. Who are you? I am. It's so simple. And then yes, I am also a dreamer, I am a creator, I am an observer, I am a player, I am a dancer, I am an analyst, I am a musician. Infinite complexity can be drawn out. But underlying it is something so simple. The complex, simple. It is this truth which the scientist captures, and this is never discussed in philosophy of science really. Why we assume that the fundamental reality of the universe will be simple. The whole quest of science is to get to something where you will come to one principle, one equation, one atom, one substance, one particle, one something, one energy, one law, which is the origin of it all. Why couldn't it have been two? Why couldn't it be three laws, three fundamental particles? Because innately our mind says if there are three laws, there must be some law of which these three are an exception. There must be an underlying principle of which these three are specialized aspects. We just sense that instinctively, intuitively. And so it is on that assumption that the whole quest of physics moves. The second assumption is that that law, when we get to it, will be understandable and which we will be able to cast into formula. This assumption is wrong. The first assumption is correct, that there is one underlying simple principle. But the assumption that we will be able to understand it by logic and reduce it to a formula, that is wrong. The idea is that simplicity transcends intellect. And so you cannot articulate that into a simple formula. Because the formula itself is a product of that transcends your formula. But you can know it and you can articulate it perhaps in idea, in word, which is an approximation, and even perhaps a formula which is an approximation, or many different facets of formula which are each catching one facet of it. How many such formula would there be? Maybe it could be an infinity of facets. So no, these are all domains of speculation. But the truth is this. There is a simple principle, truth, and that is the one chooses to become and manifest its multiplicity and enjoy its multiplicity as a play of bliss. This is the underlying truth of the whole creation, that the creation is an outburst of the bliss of the one to know and enjoy his innumerableness and multiplicity. Yes, so we have caught it in a mental formula, but we don't really understand it. So the mental formula always ends up with a contradiction, a counter question. Why then the suffering? And so we have to have more explanations and so on. But if we identify with the consciousness, I am, and I am all these. This is my delight, this is my play, this is my journey of self-discovery. So the complex, simple, capital S. The many-sided single. We can use the images for some of these, like the top of a mountain. Visualize a cone. The point on the top is single, but it has many sides. How many sides? Innumerable. Each line, each direction. Between any two, you have an infinity of finer directions. This is the nature of that. But you see, this picture is reductionist. The one point is now an intangible, non-physical point. It is only an idea point. The moment you catch it in a shape, it has many sides and it is limited. It is the mathematical point, the tip of the cone, which is our reference here. So similarly, when the mind approaches that many-sided single, the mind knows it as an abstraction. Supermind knows it as a rich, full-bodied completeness. I am all these, many-sided single. The word of the silence, ineffable. So again we see these two facets. The silence, ineffable, is one side of that truth. The word which manifests the whole universe is the other side. And it's obvious when the word is spoken, the word could not be spoken if there was not a backdrop of silence. Try to speak in a noisy space, the noise drowns you. And if it is chaotic noise, you cannot conceive of a sound because all is absorbed in the complexity of the chaos. Doesn't that mean that absolute silence is nothing but chaos of sound? Here's an interesting idea. So you could see that as all possibility of movement, which then becomes a flat static. Or you could call it a flat static in which there is movement. You see how it's one reality, you're just in the mind exaggerating one facet or the other. In fact, physics comes to this recognition. With quantum physics, we can say empty space is the product of all possible vibrations of energy. And when you have a particle, it is in the backdrop of this all possible vibrations, which is infinite energy, that a wave stands out. So the empty space is infinite energy, and the particle is a tiny ripple on the infinite energy. That's how we can see it. Or we can see empty space as a negation, no energy. in which a particle appears. But then that doesn't make sense. So it's the same idea here. These principles being at the source of things, they reflect in so many phenomenal processes. So we can catch these phenomena and use the analogies. That's what earlier was discussed as names and forms of the universe, through which we can get a glimpse of that. I'm tempted to share another phenomenal example of this that has to do with smell. Smell is one of the mysteries which scientists are still confused. We really don't understand what is this experience of smell and how it functions. How we can have so many variations innumerably. But what we do find, and this is interesting, if you mix all possible smells, let's say we have 100 different samples of different essences of oils, mix them all, what will it smell like? The nose actually smells them as no smell. And then you intensify one of them and you will recognize that one as the only smell, and the mix of them all is no smell. This is the same idea here. All possible variations of movement is equivalent to no movement. So in the Isha Upanishad, you will remember this text where the divine is described, the Brahman is described as faster than all things, although it does not move. It is ahead of all things, ahead of the gods who run, etc. And Sri Aurobindo gives this example there. He says you could conceive of no movement as infinite movement. When there's infinity of movement rapidity, infinite rapidity, it's as if there is nothing. So the word of the silence ineffable. So the silence, capital S, is such a consciousness that appears unmoving, and yet its unmovingness is infinite movement. And then when it chooses to manifest that infinite movement, you can call it potential, or the silence, which is the other side of infinite movement, that is the word spoken, which is the creative word. So think of it this way now. The silence, capital S, is nothing but all possible forms of all possible universes and all possible events in all the universes overlapping at the same time. What will you get? Flat still. And what is universe? Separation of one possibility, one potential, removed from that flat still silence. So the silence already held all possible universes, and a particular aspect of the universal movement is projected, and that's the vibration of the creative word. But the vibration was always there, and the completeness of the vibration became the silence. The silence articulating itself became the creative word. And they're not really two different things, they're a single experience. So the word, capital W, of the silence, capital S, ineffable, capital I. It is something on the edge of our comprehension, actually beyond our comprehension. Then, the impersonal, omnipresent person. So again, if you play with this idea of what is impersonality, if I am intensely personal with each one equally, that is impersonal. So when the divine is impersonal to the whole universe, you could say it is equivalent to being deeply personal with each thing at each moment, at each location. So it is the omnipresent personality. He is present everywhere, intimately close to each atom, to each point of space, intensely personal, and that we call, oh, he is impersonal because he meets all things equally. But behind that is this enormous one personality which embraces everything in its impersonality, and it meets each one, each thing at each moment, omnipresently as a personal. So the impersonal, omnipresent person, the mystery, capital M. This is a very interesting idea. When you begin to explore the infinite, the deeper you go, the more you discover that there is to know. When as a child you look at the ocean, oh, it's very simple, it's just a few waves of water here. Then I take a boat and I go deep into the ocean. Oh my God, it's so large. Then I take a submarine and I go down and say, my God, it is so much more large. And each time that you go deeper, you discover how much greater it is. And the nature of the mystery is that the more you know of it, the more you discover that there is to know. And it keeps growing in scope as you begin to know it more. So unendingly, the Veda images this as climbing to the peak of a mountain and discovering a still greater mountain range beyond. And so you go to the next mountain range and you discover a still greater mountain range beyond, unendingly. And because this is the nature of that reality, therefore this is the nature of the universe. And therefore, when we truly awaken to being able to experience the universe as it knows the universe, in a supramental consciousness, we will discover that there is an infinity of possibilities left to be discovered. And each time we enter the depths of those possibilities, we will find still greater possibilities in the universe, in form, in the play, in the form. And the richness of the play will increase as we proceed. That's why Sri Aurobindo says all of the suffering of the universe's journey so far will be justified by what has to come later. And each of those moments of discovery, each of those experiences of unfoldment will be as if a new wave of bliss. And the nature of the bliss is that it is infinite. It's like a wave which is encompassing the whole universe, which awakens in me as I discover this new dimension. And in each one of us, as each one of us discovers a new dimension, unique to each one, and all of these waves piling up crest upon crest unendingly as we grow in the universe. Such will be the nature of the unfolding of divinity in the universe. So that's why he says right now we're just in the first stages where there are a few original discords of the orchestra. We're still tuning our instruments, getting familiar with them. The mystery. Translucent in highest consciousness to its own spirit, but to a lesser consciousness veiled in its own exceeding light and impenetrable forever. So this is the last description, is how it knows itself and how we know it. To itself, it is entirely translucent. All that it is known to itself entirely. That is the nature of the Chit of the Satchidananda. All is revealed, all is aware, entirely with no exception. This whole mystery which we have just seen, unendingly infinite, is all known to it in its highest status. And as we come down, less and less is known, more and more is veiled. But veiled by what? Veiled in its own exceeding light. Because we shift to a light which is of a lower intensity, lower density, a perception which is less. The light above now is too intense. It veils what is beyond. So the image here would be very simply for us. You look at the sky in daytime. It seems such a simple closed dome. It's almost as if you were a little taller, you could reach out and touch the sky. The cloud is just a little farther than your reach of touch. But when that bright sky is removed, the light is removed, you see the enormous infinity of the stars beyond. And that is beyond your reach. It's almost something transcending, divine in its character, to our senses, to our mind. But what concealed it was the brightness of the light. So to a consciousness which knows itself entirely, nothing is concealed. But the moment the consciousness reduces and the power of conception is limited, the brightness of what is above is concealing all the infinities beyond, and successively layered all the way down until to the lowest it looks up, it sees a light, it is impenetrable forever. You can never get to that. And yet to the highest, everything is already known. If you go down still further, the interesting thing is the light conceals its own capacity of knowledge. And then we begin this experience of ignorance. I cannot know. I'm unable to know, although I have a faculty of knowledge. And even that, when it dims further, I don't even have a faculty of knowledge. And then it dims further. Even the idea that I could know is non-existent. The power of knowledge is as if non-existent. And then you are in pure darkness. And what conceals the darkness here? Darkness itself conceals. So you cannot even know that you could know. So when darkness was blind and engulfed within darkness, he was seated within it, immense and alone. And this is the nature of the material consciousness. The darkness, the substance is unconscious, knowing, was blind, could not even know even if it tried to, and engulfed within darkness, surrounded by such a thick darkness that it cannot even conceive of the capacity to know. It's completely lost. What was it truly? It was still him, immense and alone. And this is the principle here. At the highest, where it knows itself entirely, at the lowest, where it is impenetrable forever, it is still he who knows this experience, even as he knows that experience. And to the supramental consciousness, all of these are one single whole awareness of itself. This is the true nature of the Supreme, of the Divine, of the Absolute, which true nature is now diminished to a sheer absolute, mentally unknowable, unnameable, utterly transcendent, because we chose to approach it through the mind by elimination of individual and universe. And you see now what a difference it makes how you approach it. And that's why Sri Aurobindo says the problem with the earlier philosophies and the spiritual experiences developed in these lineages were simply that they approached it through the mind or through some intermediate faculty of the intuition perhaps. But to be able to know that truly in itself in this way, one has to go above and enter the domain of the supramental consciousness and the supramental cognition, supramental knowledge. So, supermind has quite another, a positive and direct and living experience of the Supreme Infinite. This is how he said. And this is the nature of that living experience which we have just read. These things are, to the dimensional mind, irreconcilable opposites. But to the constant vision and experience of the supramental truth consciousness, they are so simply and inevitably the intrinsic nature of each other that even to think of them as contraries is an unimaginable violence. And this is the contrast between the two approaches. The mind's approach sees them as opposites, irreconcilable. You can never bring them together truly. But already in our thinking and in our exploration, and these are all examples Sri Aurobindo himself has given, we've been able to push our mind to a point where we can say, yes, we can see how they're facets, we can see how they're related. But that's as far as the intellect can go. It cannot go further into the experience. To the experience, still to be one and to be many is for us a contradiction. So even to think of them as contraries is an unimaginable violence to the supramental truth consciousness. Because in that consciousness where I am all, they are so simply and inevitably the intrinsic nature of each other. That's how we saw how describing one you end up with the other, describing the other you end up with the one. But in the experience, they are deeply enmeshed into each other. Even if you choose to highlight one, you can never ignore the other. They are as if one inside the other, part of each other in the supramental experience. But simply, there's no complexity, there's no thinking required, there's no passage of thought process or logic to go from one to the other. You are simply that, simply and inevitably, the nature of each other. So we have two very different approaches depending on the two different consciousnesses with which we seek the Supreme. The walls constructed by the measuring and separating intellect have disappeared, and the truth in its simplicity and beauty appears and reduces all to terms of its harmony and unity and light. So between these two domains of mind approaching and supermind approaching to know Supreme, what's the difference? Simply, he says, the walls constructed are removed. The walls constructed by the measuring and separating intellect. Intellect cannot know otherwise except to measure and cut off. You remove all the walls and there you have. What do you have? Truth in its simplicity and beauty. And it was always there. It just appears. You remove the walls and you saw what was truly there. Nothing has changed. Interestingly, in the highest experiences, even of the traditional Vedanta, and in those the negative approaches of the traditional Vedanta and the Buddhist approach, those who have reached the highest end up with exactly this description. When they reach to that, they say, all that we discussed in our philosophy and our teaching, just forget that. Get to the experience. Let it reveal itself to you. That's all that matters. But again, there are degrees within that. Sri Aurobindo points to the highest power of cognition, which is in the supermind, where all these walls are entirely removed and all is then simply seen. Simplicity and beauty. All this appears in its simplicity and beauty and reduces all to terms of its harmony and unity and light. Now this simplicity and beauty are as if facets of each other, and we see this in the physics very easily. When the equation becomes more simple, they say, oh, this is so elegant. In a simple single movement you've captured so much. There's a beauty of it in the simplicity. And we know, because it is beautiful, because it is simple, we know it is true. And this principle you see even in the human life. When a single action, simply stated, simply put, suddenly puts everything in perspective, you say, this is so beautiful, this is so true. And that's what we find repeatedly in Sri Aurobindo's articulation. And when you have that simplicity and the beauty, the harmony, the unity, the light, everything is there. Dimensions and distinctions remain, but as figures for use, not a separative prison for the self-forgetting spirit. If we may use an analogy again, in our map that we drew of the world, in the globe which we held, we had every country colored in a different color. We had lines separating the borders. But that's how the mind could conceive of the globe and the map. If the mind removed those borders and removed the colors, there would be no map. It would be just a flat sheet of paper. So it needed to create those lines and those colors. But the reality is, when you rise above the earth in an aeroplane or in a rocket and look at the earth from outer space, there are no lines, really. Yes, there are lines and colors, but they are the natural colors of the earth expressing her multiplicity of qualities. They are not lines which cut up and separate. What you have now as the lines and colors describe, express. They do not cut up and separate. So they are figures for use, not a separative prison for the self-forgetting spirit. This just last phrase is something so profound, so simply stated. We as individuals are that, remember? The universe is that, remember? And yet, I don't know that. I don't see that in the universe. Why? Because of the lines, the separations, which have formed a prison for the spirit which has forgotten itself. Where's the spirit? I am that spirit. I don't know it, I don't feel it, I don't experience it, I don't remember it. You say I am timeless, I don't remember. I don't even remember when I was born, but I remember sometime in my childhood. And this is the line, the barrier which has enclosed the mind's memory. The perception of the infinity enclosed by the mind's barriers. Everything of what I truly am has been cut up and enclosed, and the spirit has as if been locked in to a point where it has forgotten itself. That's what we are. So now, from a certain perspective, we can say there's nothing to be done. We are already that. But if you want to experience that you're already that, then you have to do something. You remove these barriers, which you have yourself put ultimately. No one else has put it on you. You put these barriers, now you remove them, and then you'll find you're already what you are. Nothing changes still. So from a certain perspective, you can say nothing to be done. Everything is exactly as it should be. From another perspective, complementing, we say there is everything to be done. We have to now grow to remove all these barriers, discover ourselves, realize and manifest that divinity, that potential, transform the world and so on. Oh, but there's nothing to be transformed. The world is already what it is. Why do you want to transform it? You can see how these are apparently contradictory positions to the intellect, but to the divine experience seen in the supermind. Oh, they're just two ways of describing the same thing. All is exactly as it should be. The unfolding also is exactly as it should be. The effort you make or you don't make is exactly as it should be. That you should strive to make greater effort is exactly as it should be. In one of the aphorisms, across 2 or 3 aphorisms, Aurobindo gives this, I don't remember the exact words, so I will summarize. He says, if God chooses to put me in hell, I have to accept. On the other hand, if God shows me the way I have to go forward and then prevents me from going forward with his other hand, then I have to strive to overcome his own resistance and opposition. Now, these look like contradictory terms to the consciousness. On the one hand, yes, I'm exactly where I am in my ignorance, in my little hell which I have self-created. Who prevents me from growing? Well, I set my own barrier, or the divine allowed those barriers, or the divine manifested, whatever name you give to it. But there is that potential, and I have to strive to reach it because that is the truth of my deepest being. I chose that I should strive to reach it. And so I have to overcome the barriers I have set myself because I chose that I will set myself the barrier and overcome them. And that's the nature of the game. So, dimensions and distinctions remain, but as figures for use. And we have created a world where we can play with these forms and distinctions, not as a separative prison for the self-forgetting spirit. And we are destined to break out of the prison and play, unfold our freedom. So this is the paragraph which summarizes the difference in approach from the intellect to the supramental. Once it is chosen, then it is inevitable. But the inevitability itself is a free choice. The choice to make the universe such that it unfolds its own opposite condition is the free choice. Having been made, in time we experience an unfoldment. In the oneness, which is timeless, it's already done because it was chosen, it's done. You see the difference. This is a good point to pause on, and there's so much that is conveyed in just a few sentences, very profound, that this is a passage which we could also dwell upon in the intervening period, meditate on each of these phrases and terms used for a very enriching experience. Om